This episode I'm joined by Ran Prieur, who is a writer and blogger. He is well known for his essay How to Drop Out and consistently blogs on topics such as collapse, society, psychology, freedom, drugs and consciousness. His work can be found at www.ranprieur.com, and in this episode we discuss collapse, freedom and dropping out. I'd like to thank all my patrons for making this podcast possible, and if you'd like to support Hermitix or become part of the Hermitix community, please find our Discord, Patreon, merchandise and donation links in the description below. Enjoy. Ran Prieur, thanks very much for joining us on the Hermitix podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me.
For what we just discussed, your first sort of interview in a long time, other than the short documentary, your first interview ever over the internet.
That's right.
So just before we sort of get into it, we're going to be talking about sort of alternative lifestyles, what's going on in society at the moment. You've shot me a few questions, probably come into collapse and dropping out, because these are the things you're famous for. But for the people who don't know you, I sort of was thinking, how would I describe, your work, and how would I describe what it is you do? And I came to a sort of a bit of a dead end, because it's tough to describe. So how would you describe what it is you do, your project, and sort of why you're a name?
It is a hard question. Some people ask me, what do you write about? And I'm not sure what to tell them. Like I try to, on my blog, I try to ask important questions and come up with answers that I haven't seen yet, and try to keep it as concise as I can. And, I started out, the things I'm interested in have changed a lot over the years. Like, I'm most famous for this How to Drop Out essay. If you right to this day, if you put How to Drop Out of Society into Google, I'm pretty sure that I'm the first hit on that. So I get a lot of people from that. I mean, definitely that's important to me, to like find a way of living where the system doesn't have you over a barrel. But it's been like 15 years since I wrote that, and I wrote about collapse a lot. Let's say this: when I wrote about collapse 15 and 20 years ago, I was thinking it was going to be, the Mad Max kind of thing. I mean, that's the first thought when you think of collapse. You think of like all the systems. There's no government. There's no money. All the public institutions are gone. But people are still basically the same. And what we've got right now with coronavirus is almost exactly the opposite. Like all the institutions are still there, but it seems like it's changing us culturally.
What sort of cultural changes are you seeing?
I don't know if we're going to see them yet, but I think it will happen. I think it's like a big cocoon that we've all gone into, and I think it's going to start on the personal level. Like I'm a lot more interested now in psychology than I used to be. Like, I'm thinking about like psychological collapse and motivational. The system all the institutions might survive, except that people won't be motivated to keep it going. There's a lot of reevaluation of what activities are important and what are not. There's a lot of debate right now about like useful, like what jobs are really essential and what jobs are not essential. Just on a level of people getting along with other people, I think there's a lot of like people who have like some kind of slight dysfunction in their relationships, and now they're forced to like be in the same place all day long, and that the slight problems become more intolerable and people have to work through stuff. And I think that's going to lead, it's hard to predict cultural change. I was thinking about this, like okay, if you're looking at coronavirus, the progress of the virus can be mathematically modeled. That's pretty easy to predict. And economic changes are a little harder to predict. And cultural changes are impossible. Like, who in the 1930s, who could have imagined the 1960s? Nobody did. So we don't know. I'm looking forward to like what's going to happen in mostly in this decade. I mean, I see that there seems to be like a cycle. Like the 60s, lots of crazy stuff happened, and then the 90s were like relatively like radical and counterculture compared to the 80s, and now we've got another 30-year cycle. So I'm looking forward to it.
So we're in the sort of the start of the 60s again, except this time we're all a bit more atomized and without the communities and
yeah. I mean, at the beginning of the 60s, I mean, it was coming out of the 50s, and that was like a very I've been thinking about like what the 60s, how the 60s were radical. Like I'm thinking the 60s as the breakdown of agricultural morality. Like all the sexual stuff that got broken down in the 60s is like no sex until marriage. The only purpose of sex is procreation. That's all stuff that comes back to like ancient agricultural societies that succeeded by maximizing their population, and we had a lot of laws and cultural norms that have been passed down just by ancient agricultural societies that need to maximize their population. Now we don't need to do that anymore, and a lot of rules got thrown out the window in the 60s, and probably including some good ones, and it kind of fed into like hedonism, and people like had freedom to do fun stuff that that maybe is good to do but not to do too much of. And we worked through that, and now I'm not sure where we are right now, but this is, I mean, if you look at the decades, like I was thinking about like the event that defines the beginning and the end of the decade, and I think the 60s, it's not at the number, it's at some social event, and it would be the Kennedy assassination. I think would be like that's what threw the door open to the 60s, and with 20s, it's obviously it's coronavirus.
We're getting quite deep into it, and I haven't asked you the Hermitix question. We'll come back to this stuff. It's
sure.
Great. But the Hermitix question is, you can place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation. Who do you pick?
Okay, number 1, Charles Fort. I'm a huge. I read a lot of Charles Fort. I don't know if you familiar with Charles Fort?
I'm not.
He was like, okay. Well, have you heard? Like there's he wrote in the 1920s, and he was like a early paranormal researcher, and he would like spend day after day in libraries looking through scientific magazines for scientific articles that science had excluded because they didn't fit. Basically he'd look at reputable sources for the weirdest shit he could find, and then just collect. He had shoeboxes full of notes about all this weird stuff, and then he would write books about all these anomalies, and he'd tie them together with this general philosophy. I mean, Thomas Kuhn and his idea of like paradigm shifts and all that. Charles Fort was saying that same stuff like decades earlier, and just about like he says, like only the universal can really exist, and anything smaller than the universal pretends to exist by drawing an arbitrary line around itself. But this line cuts through certain things, and certain data has to be excluded for things to feel real. And so he's like, okay, you've got this dominant paradigm. I don't think that's the word he used. And you've got these things at the edge that don't fit, and they're excluded, and at some point they're integrated, and then you have a new understanding that incorporates this stuff, but you're never finished. There's always more stuff outside it. So that's my first thinker, would be Charles Fort.
So that's sort of a philosophy of ego and like the I. So why these singular things don't exist, like everything's connected. Was he going towards that sort of thing, or was it?
Yeah, he was definitely early in the whole everything is connected thing. Like he said, one measures a circle beginning anywhere, which means you can start with any piece of data and just keep looking, and you can understand the whole through that. I'd say he was more like a natural philosopher than a psychological philosopher, but it's just about like the nature of reality is like everything blurs together. It's like waves in an ocean. You can't really draw a line, and we try to draw a line and say this is where one wave begins, the other ends, but we can't really draw it. And he would write about like really like rains of fishes, rains of frogs, like a rain of like frogs falling from the sky, rains of blood. Those are like the most famous Fortean things. But he would write about like what we would now call UFO sightings, that they didn't really have that term back then. Just all kinds of weird stuff, and the message is not like this is like space aliens are real. The message is like reality is weird. That would be one of my thinkers, and my number 2 thinker would be Ivan Illich. And Ivan Illich was like a social philosopher who wrote mainly in the early 70s. His most famous stuff was written then, and he's not anti-civilization. He's anti-modernity, and he just he wrote a book called Toward a History of Needs. And it's about how like all these things that we didn't need, and then needs are created. Like okay, if there weren't cars, we would all live close together. But because we have cars, it causes sprawl. That's the kind of thing that he would write about. Because we have cars, cities are built for cars, and now suddenly you need a car when you didn't need it before.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is one of the things I mentioned recently with John Cousins and Dmitry Orlov. It's the sort of what's left out from these supposed freedoms. So Illich, who I'm like getting round to reading from doing the research into this interview, he was a big influence on you, and these are the things that I'm interested in. Ones who aren't aren't sort of like John Zerzan, who are primitivists, but are equally sort of sensibly anti-modernity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's mentioned is that all these freedoms always. So you're free to own a car, but you're also, that freedom comes with the cost of you're free to get in a traffic accident. You're free to only drive on the roads that you're allowed to drive on, etc., etc. So these all have certain limitations built into them, which is sort of lying into what feeding into what Illich is saying, is that once you sort of give people X, you have to remember that from X comes a lot of other things. So it's like, there's a freedom of cars, but then that also means that roads are coming in and they're destroying, and that becomes the normal thing.
It's funny that people think of cars as freedom in America. Yeah, a car is freedom, but there's almost nothing we do that's as constrained as driving. Like, you have to go exactly the same speed as the other traffic. You you can't. You have to follow an exact path. Imagine if you're on foot in the middle of the moors. You can walk in any direction. You can walk at any speed. You can look at anything. And with a car, you have to do a lot of things exactly a certain way. And all you get out of it is the places you have to go are farther away.
So was Ivan Illich sort of your first real, let's say, brainwave moment where you realised that the normality around you could be questioned, could be critiqued in that way?
Yeah, well, he was the first really smart social philosopher that I ever read. But if I were to go farther back to my biggest counterculture influence, is this book that's been now completely forgotten, called The Robin Hood Handbook by Bill Kaysing, who later became slightly famous for moon landing conspiracy theories, that the moon landing was faked, which I don't believe. But he wrote this book, and someone gave it to me when I was 16 years old, and it was like all this total 60s counterculture stuff about go the man and your establishment job, and how you should go it really romanticized dropping out of society and living in the woods and stuff like that. So that was probably the first thing that tipped me into that. And
And who would your third thinker be?
It's hard for me to I'm going to answer a slightly different question. That if I could sit and talk to certain people from history, maybe some fiction writers, I'm a big fan of Emily Bronte, and I don't know if she'd have anything to say to Charles Fort and Ivan Illich, but I think there's just some stuff that she got that hardly anyone at the time got, about how Emily Bronte's famous novel is Wuthering Heights, and people think Wuthering Heights is about romantic love, but I don't think that's it at all. I think it's about this kind of primal sense that you have when you're young, and then society kind of breaks it down in us, and the book is about people trying to get back to this primal aliveness and being crushed by the system. That's kind of what that book means to me. So I suppose that would be my third person, although I'm not sure she'd have much to say to those other people.
It's interesting that you mentioned with Wuthering Heights, this society sort of breaking down the primal thing, because one of my favourite essays of yours is about the school system, where, just to sort of paraphrase it, you sort of end up saying that the school system, at least the Western school system, is a system of abuse, and if you don't think it is, they've just got their claws into you really, really deep, and sort of from day one, these institutions are in, and this is what I liked about it's sort of pretty unforgiving towards schools and education. Has your opinion on this changed, or are you still?
It's basically the same. I mean, do you familiar with John Taylor Gatto? John Taylor Gatto wrote this book called, he was a teacher, he was the New York State Teacher of the Year, and he wrote this book called The Underground History of American Education. And he's a teacher who's against the education system, and about just basically how it weakens us and institutionalizes us. And he would say kindergarten is like a utopian trap. It's you go to kindergarten and you're all happy, and then gradually they start making it more and more regimented. He talked about how the way schools are now, we take for granted this normal, but it was actually he argues that particular very powerful people intentionally set it up that way to make us all interchangeable tools in an industrial machine. Like the education system is grid-like in the sense that there's grids. The grid on one level it's divided into levels, and so vertically you get one level, another level, the grades. But then if you go side to side, like any school you go to is going to have the same levels. So it makes our socialization very predictable. It makes us all more uniform, and it trains us. I mean, it trains us to do what we're told all day, even though we don't feel like doing it. And there's schools are getting better. There's a Montessori. I don't know that much about Montessori, but I know this is going in the right direction of like kids being able to direct their own course of study. But mostly what schools do is they beat the life out of you and they make you like you. I mean, and parents. I mean, it's not just schools. Parents do this too. I was just reading an old email someone sent me, or one of my old posts about the kids might get their parents get their kids this like train set with all these little tracks that can fit together and all these cars that can move around. And the right way to do it is for the kids to just play with it and move stuff around and set it up. But it's talking about like parents who like buy this thing for their kids, and then the parents like set it up and glue all the parts down. So all the kid can do is like, instead of like being able to make their own track route, the kids can do nothing but run the trains around a track route that exactly exists. And why do parents do that? It's because our whole culture is hostile to improvisation and something like that.
But it also, I think this is from your essay as well. It also sort of, there's a couple of things. This sort of institutionalization sort of it makes you accept things which don't seem absurd until you finally lay them out. So sort of, when you're a kid, you just want to run around. You're a big bag of energy, and yet you accept the absurd reality of, well, we'll just sit in this fluorescently lit room and not go to the loo. Not enact or or perform our natural functions until we're told that we can. And it just seems, when you finally start deconstructing them, it seems absurd. But these systems just keep on going and going, and yet people seem to. I think I don't know if you'd agree. People seem to actually start to enjoy them.
I guess a lot of people do. I mean, I always dreaded going to school. I was, but I had a pretty good home life. Maybe people with worse home lives look forward to going to school, and certainly you get to hang out with other kids. I just think there's a lot of room to make it better than it is.
So I think maybe we'll jump onto sort of the big question. So you are most well known for your essay "How to Drop Out," and it's I think it's kind of poignant that there is a lot of people Googling how the hell do I drop out of society, and I don't think many people even really know. They know what they mean by that, but we can't really define it. You can't really. It's hard to define. How would you define dropping out?
I know I've done updates to it because there's this romantic idea of I suppose it goes back to like the 1950s with Jack Kerouac, and it's funny how many of the icons of dropping out throughout if you go into the community, people are into that stuff, how many of them like weren't really doing it in the way that the romanticized way, like how many of them had support. Jack Kerouac I think he lived with his mom when he was writing How to Drop Out. There's this book called I want to say it's The Good Life by Helen Nearing. I might be getting that wrong. And she was living on inheritance. I'm living on inheritance. I mean, not very much, but enough that if I'm frugal, I don't have to have a job. This guy, Dick Pernecki, who went and lived in Alaska, he had friends who would like fly in plane loads of supplies. It's the romantic idea of total self-sufficiency. It's just hard to find any example of that actually happening. And for a long time, I was into homesteading. I wanted to like go get some land and live off the land. And I traveled around and visited other people who were doing that. Almost everyone I stayed with who was trying homesteading were not that happy, and they did a lot of driving. And it's just unrealistically hard to be completely self-sufficient to produce everything you need. And in practice, you end up like driving into town all the time to get stuff, and then you need a source of money. So now I've trying to change my focus and away from like actually completely physically being out of the system to just kind of living on the fringes of the system and using what you can get. Like, okay, here's the thing I said, like if you're a bird, you're living in the forest, someone cuts the trees down and builds a barn. The bird just lives in the barn, right? That's the smartest thing for the bird to do, is to like adapt to what's there and be in the system but not of it, to use what the industrial system is built, but still stay like mentally or psychologically outside it.
Well, that's what I think. That's what more mature about your piece than I've mentioned him before. I mean, I'm a big fan of Zerzan's work, and I enjoy reading about primitivism, but primitivism would be destroy the barn, burn the barn down and let the tree grow back. And that seems
Uh-huh.
and that seems to be sort of, you're coming at it of a standpoint of sort of non-aggression and almost pacifism, and not expending energy on that task of like, I'm going to destroy it because I hate it, but like, well, I'll have to be in it, but I'm going to
Uh-huh.
use my energy within it towards things that I want to do as much as I can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you think
Yeah.
that is, is that how you describe the mature way of dropping out? It's more of a mental thing.
Yeah, I would say that it is more of a mental thing, and I always kind of attract this energy of people wanting to be like puritanical, like they're trying to avoid guilt, they're trying to avoid participation, and that's something I've said like in my update to How to Drop Out. It's not about avoiding guilt, it's not about avoiding participation. It's about the system not having not having you over a barrel. It's about not being in a position where you have to do what you don't want to do day after day.
Do you think then what it is that, what we're dropping out from abstractly then, is that just systems of control?
Well, that's a hard question. Like what? It's just like what you do minute by minute, day by day. Is it something that emerges from it emerges from the life inside you, or something that emerges from the need for the system to keep itself going?
And you consider the majority of jobs within the system?
Yeah, yeah, and right lately I support unconditional basic income, and I used to be like more like if you're against the systems, then you tend to be against the government, and then you might be like, you might be hostile to the idea of like the government taxing us and giving us money. But I'm not anti-government. It's like whatever works. If we can, I think an unconditional basic income is not perfect. It would cause new problems, but I think it would solve more problems than it would cause, and it would give a lot of people freedom to. There's this idea that if we get a UBI, everyone will just sit at home and get high and play video games all day, but people want to do useful things. People want to do useful things to support the greater society, and most people like to keep busy, and I think a UBI would give the workers more leverage to, like, you wouldn't have to have a terrible job if you could be okay without a job, and it would give the workers more leverage to like define job conditions so that what they're doing all day is meaningful to them. You're probably seen like the thing about bullshit jobs. Is it David Graeber who wrote that
Graeber,
famous
yeah.
thing about bullshit jobs? Yeah, that's like a big thing now that people are becoming aware of, is how many jobs are unnecessary, and it's just like busy work.
I always thought that from the UBI, let's say that the UBI is enough for a lot of people to just live, and it seems to me that psychologically society has gone on so long now with the sort of 9 to 5 day a week job thing, that a lot of people would have a massive sort of black hole psychologically where 35, 40 hours of their week is gone. And I wonder whether or not that would be filled with something optimistic or with something pessimistic. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a bad conclusion to that?
Yeah, I think actually that's why I think coronavirus is good. It's like getting us gradually into this, because if all of a sudden everyone like stayed home and got paid to do nothing, then people would go insane. People like to, and like a lot of people, when they retire after a whole lifetime of highly structured life, and they retire, they get depressed. So culturally, that's something we need to work through, is like how to manage our own time. Little kids are good at managing their own time, and then they go to school, and that just navigating the day minute by minute from doing what they feel like doing gets like crushed out of them, and they get into like this other system of doing what they're told all day, and then they go through their entire life, and then they retire, and then they don't know how to get back to that. So that's a hard thing to get back to. I struggle with it myself, with like getting through a day and having everything I do be something that I feel like doing that leads somewhere.
How do you think it is then that a child sort of structures their day, or would structure be the wrong word in that case?
Yeah, it's a lot of like I have to go back to primitivism. Like, I'm not a primitivist, but what I think is we can look at primitive societies, hunter gatherers, and how they do things. We can learn some things from how they do things and apply it to our own world without trying to exactly duplicate that. And in a lot of like, you don't even have to go back that far. Just in like pre-modern societies, kids start out young doing whatever their parents do. really young, like at 2 years old, they start out helping their parents with whatever they're doing, and they get into that. They're doing useful things from the very beginning, and what we've got is just a lot of like, oh man, I'm not sure where I'm going with this. I think that would be a way that we could make our society better, is if more of the stuff that we do is stuff that more of the useful stuff we do is stuff that parents and kids can do together, so that kids don't get like, you can't just there's an extreme position is like, let's just put these kids in a completely empty world and have them build something out of nothing. But in practice, you want to have a continuation of kids learning to do what their parents are doing. You just want that stuff to be more obviously meaningful, and next, now we're getting into mechanization. Like mechanization has replaced. We've got this assumption that like any physical job is tedious and should be replaced by machines. But just simple physical tasks can be really meditative, and I think machines have. Are you familiar with Matthew Crawford? Matthew Crawford, he's wrote a book. I can't remember the name of his books, but he writes books about like, what was his book? Shop Class as Soulcraft, I think was one of his books, about like how working with physical tools and repairing engines and stuff like that is really good for us. And we've kind of lost. We're all too much in our heads now. We need to get back to like wrestling with the physical world.
We're sort of on UBIs and their effects. So the good effects you foresee from that is that you think people would they'd have more time to even unionize or demand better labor laws. It's
right. And it might even, we might not even need like laws. It would be like if you have a job that you want people to do, you have to have good working conditions, or you're just not going to be able to hire anyone. It'd be like a competition, like what if right now we've got workers competing with other workers to the right to have a job, but we could reverse it and have employers competing with other employers to have the funnest workplace, or the workplace this most satisfying, or that feels the most meaningful. They wouldn't even have to compete for wages because the UBI would give everyone adequate wages at least. And you'd be like, I've got all these jobs that I could do, and these jobs are all like desperate for workers. I'll pick the one that I enjoy the most.
And it's interesting though, you're on about sort of competition between employers, and and one of the questions you emailed me that I found interesting is is our culture running out of ideas? And it seems to me that this competition between employers is, if a culture is running out of ideas, is competition sort of running dry, and we're just going back to the same places every time. We're always going to Amazon, or we're always going to. Is that what you meant, or do you just think that in terms of our future, that it just seems to be the same things popping up time and time again?
Well, yeah. When I'm talking about running out of ideas, here's something I noticed. Like, look at men's business, men's suits, like the men's formal wear, and I think it's changed less. Like a men's suit has changed less in the last 100 years than it's changed in any 100-year period in history. Why? That's weird. Like, if you look at like 1920, if you go back to 1820, it's a lot different. You go to 1720, it's a lot different. So I don't know why that is. Or if you look at like, there's this link I posted about this guy wrote a book about the calling our society decadent, and what he means by decadent is like spiritual exhaustion at a high level of prosperity. And I'm also thinking about like music, like the 20th century, all these ideas, all this crazy stuff happened. I think people might look back and say that in some sense the 20th century was the peak of like technological innovation, musical innovation, and right now we're just kind of rehashing. There are not that many, if you just look at culture, there are not that many new ideas. We're just rehashing stuff that was developed in the 20th century.
So where do you think that new ideas could come from, how do you think we'd have to alter the way we think about things for new ideas to develop?
That's a hard question. Like, one way it could happen would be a total collapse, and then we have to like start from scratch and build up stuff again. Another way it could happen, I've been thinking a lot about like like the coming legalization of psychedelics.
Hmm.
And that's, like just 100 years ago, nothing what we call, because psychedelics didn't even exist. I mean, LSD. Have you read Michael Pollan? Michael Pollan wrote a book. I forget what it's called, but Michael Pollan wrote a book about psychedelics, and a lot about it was like when in the 1950s, LSD was really respectable. The people really believed in like better living through chemistry, and here's this chemical that can like be psychologically beneficial, and then Timothy Leary came along and kind of dragged LSD through the mud of the counterculture, and it got banned, and all of that stuff like seemed to feel dirty for a while, and 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 to be fair, like if suddenly LSD had been legal and everyone would be using it, it would have been too destabilizing. But I think it's inevitable that psychedelics are going to be more legal and more widely used, and I don't know where that's hard to imagine what would happen to a culture we've not only are there going to be more psychedelics, people are going to know more about the right dosing and how to figure out which ones are good for them. It's like in primitive cultures you got the shaman, and the shaman would know how a few little substances here and there that people could use to change their heads and their thinking. But now we've got like all of it everywhere. It's like universal shamanism. And I'm not sure what that's going to do to our culture, but it can do some interesting stuff. At the same time we've got like crazy stuff that's happening with biotech, and I don't know. I think artificial intelligence. I think virtual reality might be a little bit overrated. I don't know. I tend to think we're coming to the end of like what we can do. I think we're more at the end of the beginning of virtual reality. Like you can go back and you can get more immersed in video games from the 90s than you can get immersed in video games today, just because they knew better about how to make the games fun.
I think one of the things that always surprised me about virtual reality, VR, is that there was never sort of a universal one. There was never sort of a Facebook one. There's been a few like that, like social VR experiences, but none of them ever caught on, and it was always difficult to pinpoint why that was. I've heard a theory that it was put down to because the hardware that was needed was really clunky, and people had actually become very averse to wearing big heavy physical things and to their enjoyment. But I wonder if there was sort of another reason there somewhere. But I still think there's the sort of if you've ever read Snow Crash, I can't remember what it's called in Snow Crash.
Yeah.
But the sort of globalized, all connected VR world. I still think that will come at some point.
Huh.
But I think what it'll be is like an add-on for something else, which is it'll be like everyone uses Amazon app and there's an add-on, and just everyone ends up using it. I don't think it'll be some forced thing. It'll just end up. But I think that's where the frontiers lie. We don't build big things anymore, so we need somewhere where that's like allowed culturally.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I could see how there could be like it could continue to be like a million different virtual worlds, but if you look at like there used to be a bunch of different search engines, and now then it was all Google. So something like that might happen where I don't know. I think that the thing what makes virtual reality appealing is that everyone can make their own, and I think rather than all of us being in one, we might see more and more different ones. I mean, like we may be entering an age of like VR solipsism, where everyone can like go into their own particular universes just for them.
Mm-hmm.
But you could also there could also be like one big one that we all get in. I was reading this interview with William Gibson, who foresaw a lot of internet stuff in Neuromancer, and he said he used to think of the internet as a place that we would all go into. What he did not expect was it's coming out to us, and that the physical world is getting more and more overlaid with stuff that fits with the virtual world.
That sort of ties into another strange question you sent me, which is how much of global politics is being run by the human subconscious, and this is what you ask, and sort of the internet coming out and sort of affecting us in a certain way. I mean, I saw an advert yesterday for a beer, and it was to the point of parody. It was flashing images of people on yachts, and then on the screen the words beer, wealth, and success flashed up like every now and again to like. And I thought, this is literally sort of subconscious. This is I think this was deemed illegal at some point, as I can't remember what you call it, but
Oh yeah,
um,
subliminal message.
messaging.
Yeah,
But it was so obvious that I guess you just couldn't say it was
yeah.
there. But it sort of ties in the internet coming out and affecting us, and affecting us politically as well. Is this sort of what you meant, or do you think there's something else going on within us, within our sort of will and our subconscious, which is affecting politics?
Yeah, that's a when I talk about like a global subconscious, that's a really weird idea. I mean, but I wonder if you look at like, well, okay, we've got this president now in America that has got like 40% of the public completely hypnotized, and it's almost like we're living in a magical world that he's like put a spell over like 40% of the country, and none of them can explain rationally why they support him. There's no rational argument that can be made for Trump. It just feels right to these people. So on what level is that decision being made? And then, just in my own investigations of my own psyche, I discover little stuff down there that I didn't know was going on. Just things that I can't really give any examples, but just habitual ways of thinking and doing things that we think we have to do them, but it turns out they're optional. You don't have to, like, if you see something and you have a habitual way of reacting to it, you don't have to. You can notice that you're free to react differently to it. And I'm wondering how much, like, what if you hear about there's this idea of a dog whistle where like a politician can like say something that will be meaningless to most people, will seem benign, but if you have the right way of thinking, then like usually dog whistle is used in the terms of like racist speech, where there's a certain thing you can say that seems benign, but if you're tuned into the right way of thinking, then you're sending a racist message. But there can be all kinds of what if there's a lot more of that than we know about, like stuff that's going on subconsciously. It's hard to explain what I'm getting at here, but I've got this crazy idea that, okay, I was reading this thing about a group mind. Like, what if what if China, like, is a big brain, and every individual in China is like a neuron, and and the brain actually has consciousness, even though the individuals don't know that the brain has consciousness. Something like that.
Well, that's sort of collective. That's sort of
Right.
collectivism to a certain extent.
Right.
People all forming up something, and then as a collective they can act and make decisions, but equally they're still individuals. But that's what the collective does. It makes you forget that you are that single neuron.
Yeah. And so I've got this crazy idea that what if there is a collective consciousness that's made up of these subconscious of individuals rather than the conscious minds of individuals. And you can see like movements in history that were just something, it just seems like something had to happen and you're not sure why.
So what would be the difference between the way a conscious collective works and the way a subconscious collective works?
I guess the difference is that us as individuals are less aware of what its motives are, and how it's behaving. If it's feeding off of if our subconscious minds are connecting with the subconscious minds of others. You can see this on a small scale too. You can see this in like couples or families that just keep getting in the same patterns of arguments and conflicts because they're not aware of these habits they have that they actually have they could do the things differently. They just get stuck in these patterns. And what if that's happened at a global scale? This is untestable, but there's always the question of like, does it make sense to ask what it's like to be? You got millions of Chinese. You can ask what it's like to be a particular person. Does it make sense to ask what it's like to be China? That's speculative. It's unanswerable, but it's an interesting question.
And what do you think the sort of effects on history that has, because a conscious collective, whether it's a collective or not, at least has a conscious aim of sorts. The subconscious one is being pulled to and fro, right? So would that argument say that politicians are sort of the nodes which are just dragging people around?
I think I get a sense that there's something deeper that does have a motive. Like, I've speculated a lot, like the role of Trump is that a lot of Americans are just sick of the way society is going, and they want to crash it. Like, it almost seems like Trump is helping coronavirus. And why would he be helping coronavirus? It's because he represents a movement of people who are just bored and want to mess it up and want to like want something interesting to happen, or you could get even more paranoid and say like there's a motive to. Oh man, it's I read this I was into conspiracy stuff a lot. I'm less into it because the conspiracy culture is makes this assumption that everything that happens was planned consciously. George Soros and Bill Gates are sitting in a room and they decided it was going to happen exactly this way. And it did happen exactly this way, but I don't think that's how it works. I think if there is an intelligence behind history, it's not on the level of humans. It's on the level of something weirder.
What do you think that is? Do you have any sort of guesses?
It could be something like a collective unconscious. I mean, I've heard a lot of people are saying with coronavirus that it's like Gaia. It's like the Earth has sent coronavirus to knock us down a notch, or that climate change is like a message from Gaia. And I wouldn't want to be that literal, but there I can get into really weird stuff where of like time travel, like where there's some attractor in the future. There's a place in the future that we have to like the future can like reach into the past and not in there's fiction about this where people in the future like come back in time machines to like do stuff in the past and make things happen a certain way, but if you instead of people in time machines, there could be like just something going on. Getting into some weird stuff. Like you look at like people who are really important in history, like and how they were unkillable. Like Napoleon was unkillable. He would like be in all these really really situations where he was likely to get killed. Early in his career, he was like in the middle of this battle, and one of his assistants came up and said, "Get out of the way. You're in danger." And the assistant pushed him out of the way, and they said at that moment got shot by a bullet and died. And from that moment, Napoleon believed himself unkillable, and he seemed to be right. Alexander, early in Alexander's career, he's just starting his conquest. He went into this big battle, and the opposing soldiers everyone was told, whatever you do, kill Alexander. That's your main goal is to kill Alexander. And he led to the cavalry charge, and survived the battle with only a small injury. So I'm getting at some weird ideas here that maybe like
No, it's okay.
history
It's
is like there's patterns in history that have to go a certain way, and things in the physical world fall into place for something. I mean, then now you're getting at the idea that we're all living in a simulation, and if we're all living in a simulation, then who are the simulators and what do they want? And I think we kind of are. I kind of do believe we're all living a simulation, but it's not like a computer simulation. We think it's a computer simulation because that's our most advanced simulation technology. But I kind of think we're in a simulation of some technology that we can't even imagine. And I'm not sure what its motive is, but that's why I no longer think that humans are going to go extinct. I think we're just too interesting to go extinct, and history is going to fall into place a certain way so that interesting stuff keeps happening.
So you do think that we play an important part then? You don't think we're
Yeah.
just on the you don't just think we're sort of a side character in this play?
No, I think we're important. Yeah, I think if we were a side character, we would have been killed off because we're pretty harmful. Um, I mentioned psychedelics, and one I do them myself sometimes, not a whole lot, but I got this insight one time, not too long ago. I think it was just this year on Leap Year Day. I took a decent dose of mushrooms and walked around, and I became aware of the personalities of trees, and I got this insight that humans are the only thing in the universe that doesn't know that the universe is alive, and that maybe the purpose of this whole simulation is just for humans to like we're like the stupidest thing in the universe, and we have to like be rehabilitated.
Well, that's what a lot of sort of enlightenment theories are around, is that you utilize this, we'll just use the language you're using, utilize this simulation
Uh-huh.
this time, that this life that we're given, if you use
Uh-huh.
it correctly to get to the point where you understand things and become enlightened, then you get out, you get to the next thing. But if you don't, you
Yeah.
keep living it over and over again. And I mean, in a
Yeah.
simulation argument, you could say they've sort of coded something in that once you sort of become aware of the simulation on a certain level, you find the Easter eggs or the hacks, then they finally
Uh-huh.
go, okay, this person deserves to, get out of the simulation, or go to the next level or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a fun idea. I mean, it's untestable, but it's a fun idea. And it's funny, like when I think back to like in my middle school I went to, when I was like 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, the two best kids in the entire middle school both died. It's anecdotal, but it's kind of weird that that the best people seem to die and the wicked people live on and on. If this world is like something we're supposed to learn, then you have to ask, like, what's the world outside it? And I've got this crazy idea about reincarnation. My idea is that we start out, the humans are actually the lowest, and when we figure out whatever we need to figure out as humans, then we become reincarnated as like maybe some seemingly lower animals like birds or other mammals, squirrels. Like, look how much happier squirrels are than we are. Um, and then it keeps going to progressively lower creatures. And so I might be walking around, I might see like a cloud of little bugs, and well, this is another psychedelic thing. Like, my favorite thing to do on LSD is to walk around in nature. And when I'm walking in nature on LSD, a cloud of insects is literally angels. So that ties into my crazy reincarnation theory that we get reincarnated as lower and lower animals.
there's sort of a theory of complexity and happiness there, though. You're sort of saying that humans are, as we understand ourselves, relatively more complex than a squirrel, and a squirrel is
Yeah,
way more complex than a bird, and a bird's way more complex than a load of like midges or whatever.
yeah,
Do you
yep.
sort of equate complexity with unhappiness? Do you think we'd just be a lot happier if we were more just lived by our instincts like squirrels?
That's why my theory is probably wrong because what's the point of complexity if yeah definitely we'd be happier. I mean, definitely we'd be happier if we lived like that, but then I have to wonder, like, what if squirrels are happier than humans, then what's the point of humans? So, are we just an accident? But I don't think so. I don't know. This is fun stuff to think about, and there's no way to get a clear answer.
Yeah, perhaps we'll come back to this. But there's one more question you asked me, which is entirely different. But I'm
Uh-huh.
interested to see your answer, because obviously you've written a lot about this, and probably thought a lot about this. And I don't know if you've had experience with friends or family with this, but
Uh-huh.
the depression, anxiety epidemic. What do you think is behind this?
Wow, that's a really big and important question. And I get a lot. I have a lot of crazy theories about that. But here's my latest theory about depression and anxiety is that we are our bodies are being contracted and our minds are being expanded. Like, we're sticking our heads too far in. Like, anxiety comes from when you're aware of something that you can't do anything about. So, and there's a psychological oh man, I had to back up a little. Anxiety comes from when you're aware of something that you can't do anything about, and politically there's less and less we can do anything about. At the same time, there's more and more that we're aware of. um, the internet has given us all this information, and our heads are always out there running through all these details of all these things that they're supposed to be this way, and our bodies are like, what am I supposed to do? So that's my latest theory of anxiety and depression. That it's like a head body thing, and that the solution to anxiety and depression is to pull back our heads and expand our bodies, and it's hard to explain what that means, but that's something I work on. Is like I kind of when I feel anxiety, I imagine that I've got this astral body that I'm expanding outward into whatever it is that I feel anxiety about, and it seems to work. I mean, it's painful, but then it it's a way of processing the anxiety, so then I feel okay.
So you think we sort of not ignore these things, but we are fairly repellent to them? We don't want to address them?
Wait, what things?
Uh,
The
the, the the anxiety is saying,
Oh
your
yeah,
way of dealing with it is sort of to go into it.
yeah. I mean, normally, if there's something that bothers you, you avoid thinking about it. There's this quote I like from the sports coach Urban Meyer, and he says, "If you want something you don't have, change what you're doing." And it seems very obvious, but that's kind of profound. Like, if you want something you don't have, change what you're doing. And if I want to not have anxiety, then I need to process anxiety differently. And the habitual way we process it is to avoid thinking about all these things that bother us. But but what I practice instead is if I start to feel anxiety, I don't even think about the thing that's causing me anxiety. I just try to focus on that feeling and try to feel that way as long and as hard as I can and try to burn it out. And I don't know, maybe that's a mistake, but it's something I've been trying lately to try to get a handle on. I was talking to someone the other day who was saying that like when they get anxiety, it's not attached to any particular thing. It's just kind of free floating. And for me, it's not. It's always attached to a particular thing. But at the same time, I can ignore that thing and just try to focus on the raw feeling. And it just feels like the world is made of knives and needles that are poking in on me. And I need to try to expand into them and be with that pain.
Do you think that the thing we mentioned earlier, what we're dropping out of? Do you think
Uh-huh.
obviously the political angle of we sort of understand more,
Uh-huh.
but there's no way we can affect this stuff, which
Yeah.
induces the anxiety and
Right.
we can affect less and less, but we know more and more on a daily basis.
Right.
So it just sort of builds and
Exactly.
builds and builds. Do you
Yeah.
think though that the sort of automaton sort of zombie-like state of that modernity turns people into, turns them into these sort of creatures which love control? Do you think that has sort of disallows us to address things in ourselves which would help us address the questions of depression and anxiety?
That I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at, but it sounds right. Yeah. I'm trying to think of some connection between between.
Let me try to just put it a bit clearer. Let's say that
Uh-huh.
a lot of depression and anxiety comes
Uh-huh.
from people feeling that they're not able to do what
Oh, okay.
society wants them to do.
Right.
Yet at the same time, society disallows them to say or believe or feel that just isn't something to do. So people get depressed because they work a crap job, but they
Uh-huh.
don't want to admit, well, actually, I never wanted to do this. And at the same
Oh,
time,
okay.
society doesn't allow that either. They'll just pump them full of antidepressants. So society will
Yeah.
just make you do things that you never wanted to do in the first place, and then label you as depressive because you don't want to.
Yeah. That definitely happens. Yeah. And I like the idea that depression is well. Okay. It's a funny coincidence that depress is pronounced the same as deep rest, and that's a good cure for people who are depressed. Sleep a lot, and maybe that sleeping a lot is what we need to do to kind of reset ourselves. And how much of what we call mental illness is actually a healthy adaptation to an unhealthy world.
What sort of examples do you see there where it's mental illness is this adaptation to an unhealthy world?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can certainly find counter examples where people are mentally ill in a dysfunctional way. But well, I'll just go back to what I already said, that the desire to sleep all the time might be a good way to kind of lost the thread here. But mental illness is an adaptation in a healthy world. I can't think of any examples, but it just seems like that's happening. Like the world is so messed up, and people get frustrated. And I think a lot of crazy politics is just people are bored with the world as it is, and they want to just shake things up.
Coming nearer to the end here, but one thing I do want to sort of go back to, because I think it's important, and it's what a lot of people. Like you said, this is your first sort of interview for a while.
Yeah.
The short documentary that was on you was sort of about your life, and
Yeah.
not so much about your opinions on things. And obviously, because people know you for How to Drop Out, that was written in 2004. And what
Yeah.
do you think? You said you've kept updating it. Just to drop back to it, what so it's 16 years now. What sort of differences have been the clearest from when you wrote it you thought, well, this is what dropping out is compared to now, and what you think dropping out is now?
At the time, I was thinking more about like physically, and now it's more into psychology. I mean, in general, my focus has changed from the physical world, the political world, to the psychological world. But yeah, your first thought about dropping out is you go like into the woods and you like build a cabin in the woods, and I'm gonna go off on a tangent. Remember that guy who he lived for 27 years in Maine? And I don't know if you heard about this guy. I want to say his name is something Knight, but he's kind of famous. He lived in the woods for 27 years in Maine, and he had to steal from cabins in the area to survive. But if our system were a little bit different, he wouldn't have had to steal. If we had like an unconditional basic income with you could order food from drones, people could go off and you could actually. We have the technology to make it realistic, not too far in the future, for someone to just go live in the woods and use their UBI to order drones to bring them rice and beans, and in that case, a physical dropping out could become more realistic. But going back to the question of my vision of dropping out started out being become physically independent of the system, and now it's more like psychologically independent of it. That's the main change. My thinking about collapse has also gone from thinking about the big systems breaking down for physical reasons like peak oil, to the big systems breaking down because people are no longer motivated to do that's a big idea I've been into recently, a motivational collapse, where what's the tasks that society requires people to do to keep it going are getting farther and farther from the tasks that people actually feel like doing.
And what advice would you have to those who are listening to this and are coming across your work because they're a bit disenfranchised or a bit disillusioned with society, with modernity, and they're thinking about dropping out, they're thinking about exiting, thinking about leaving in some form?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm actually gonna go and see what I wrote on my page because I did an update to how to drop out only 4 years after writing it, where I say drop out is a bad metaphor, but it implies you're either in or out. In reality, no one has ever been in or out. Everyone is somewhere in between. Your mission is to find a niche where you're not held over a barrel by a system that gives you no participation in power. It's not about being pure. It's not about keeping your hands clean or avoiding guilt. Out is relative and not absolute. It's a path and not a destination. You walk the path not by disconnecting from the rest of the world, but by engaging it in an intelligent and creative way. Do not try to find a job doing what you love. Some people do that, and that's great, but realistically, I recommend that people separate what they love from what they make money from. Make money doing something easy, and then do what you love with no expectation of making money.
Okay. Is there anything we've sort of glossed over or missed that you'd like to add in?
Nothing's coming to mind now, but this is fun. If you want to do another time, maybe I'll have a better grip on what I need to say.
Oh no, there's no expectations. But yeah, I'm happy to do a part 2 at some point. That's fine. Yeah. But for now, Ran, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.